Salut, salut, bienvenue à ton tuto de vocabulaire. Et là, on va regarder les familles de mots. So, welcome to your tutor on vocabulary. And today I'm going to have a look at families of words. Because the problem is with vocabulary is how on earth do you remember how do you connect all of these different words? How many words are there in the French language? How many are there in the English language? And how on earth do you remember all of those words? So one way you can do that is by creating word families in your mind, because we've got to find a way, haven't we, to categorize stuff. And in fact, it's not that we have to find a way. I mean, our brains find ways to categorize information, categorize words, and nobody fully understands language yet. I suspect that Duolingo are probably the ones who are getting closest perhaps to having data on it, because they've got so many millions of users learning languages and giving them data all the time. But in terms of research, research still is sort of like just really scraping the edge of understanding about language. But there have been some studies of MRI scans and looking at where people place words. And for example, if you had two words that have the same spelling even and have the same or have the same sound. For example, if we take two words that have the same sound, like see and see, or here and here, or there and there, actually, when the studies have been done about how that language is stored, different parts of the brain light up to show where that person is storing the word. And usually they store it in different parts. But actually, there are lots and lots of groups of words that we could kind of make connections with and we could categorize. When we're learning a second language, you're doing this naturally all the time anyway in your native language, but how do you do it in the second language? So I thought it'd be quite interesting to have a look at an example and start thinking about it consciously, because obviously this is an unconscious thing, but to speed things up, you could do it consciously, and then it will start to become an unconscious habit. And I suppose that's a good segue into what I'm going to be talking about here. So little introduction here. So, you're already looking for patterns. You're already looking for patterns in the language all the time. And the first place you do that when you start learning French is by conjugating verbs, because you realize there are patterns that follow, and you can you can use those again and again and again in lots of different places. And it's the same thing with vocabulary. And if you can see those patterns and if you can make those connections, when you learn one word, you've got the potential to learn, maybe 10, maybe 20, or maybe others, even more than that. So, that each word might be a key, might be the opportunity to unlock like a whole load of other vocabulary. Something that runs alongside this, by the way, is of some kind of knowledge of parts of speech. And if you're shaky on your parts of speech, then it's definitely something to start to think about. Actually, is that word a verb? So is it a doing word? Is it an action in the sentence? Is it an adjective? Is it describing a thing or a person? Is it an adverb? Is it describing how something is being done? And you don't have to have an intimate knowledge of grammar, English grammar, to be able to start to make these distinctions when you're learning French. It's really useful to be able to do that. And also, you don't need to be able to name every single thing, because you start to get used to actually how you place them in a sentence. But again, something you might need to do consciously until you start to do it unconsciously, like everything we learn. All right, so let's have a look at the word habitude, une habitude. So I started off with the noun there. So I've given these some headings, some categories. You might disagree with those, and you might be able to find other ways to connect these words and categorize them differently. And I think that's important, to be able to own and understand how you're categorizing these things when we're doing this consciously. So, maybe you would move these around, and maybe I haven't found the best headings for you. So just bear that in mind, because this is a very personal language. Is such a personal thing, and how we organize it, store it, and categorize it is absolutely individual and personal, down to us. So my headings are signposts and useful for you to start thinking about this, but actually what would be really good would be to find your own signposts and way of organizing this information. But here's an example anyway. So when we're looking at the meaning of habit, so we're une habitude. So we've got a family of words based on une habitude, so a habit. And by the way, that's a noun. Yeah, and we know it's a noun anyway because it's got an une in front of it. Faire quelque chose habituellement. So you can see the relationship, yeah, between those two. And notice the you, by the way, and I'll come back to why I say that at the end. So faire quelque chose habituellement, to do something habitually. Now, if you see a mon, this isn't, I'm not talking about the ENT at the end of a verb. This clearly isn't a verb because that's the verb in the sentence. So to do something habitually, but habituellement is describing how we do something. The mon there is an ly in English. There you go. It hasn't let us down. To do something habitually. So that's an adverb. Comme d'habitude, as usual, adjective. So to do something as usual, or comme d'habitude, il pleut. Actually, I wish it would. So comme d'habitude, il pleut. Oh, as usual, it's raining. Actually, we're hoping for rain at the moment. So that's not actually true at this particular time. Par habitude, out of habit. So you can see you start applying slight changes to this word habitude, and we're getting all sorts of different, we're getting really, big bang for our buck, really, aren't we? Now we can add a little verb in front there. Prendre l'habitude de faire quelque chose. QCH is quelque chose. QQU is quelqu'un. So prendre in any dictionary, prendre l'habitude de faire quelque chose, to get into the habit of doing something, yes, STH for something, yeah. Avoir l'habitude de faire, to be in the habit of doing something. Slight change of verb. And change of verb again, perdre une habitude, to get out of the habit. So look at the flexibility already just of this word. It's incredible, isn't it? You start playing around with it. And by the way, I don't even think the list that I've come up with here is exhaustive. So you could, if you wanted to, if you were trying to organize your vocabulary in some way, you could actually sort of like have some base words and then keep on adding to those base words as you find related, in the same family, phrases or words that slightly change in the same family. Or my preference, actually, when I'm doing sort of like a brainstorm for these things, is I would like have a keyword like une habitude in the middle, and I put a circle around it, and then I would do a spider diagram off it, and sort of like that's how I would organize it. But find a way to do this, and you might just do it in your head because that might be the way you do it, or you could write it down if you've got some kind of notebook that you're writing vocabulary in. Writing vocabulary by category could also be another way of doing it, but this is just to challenge you to think, well, okay, how else can I harvest vocabulary, if you like? How can I create it, and how can I make those connections stick in my mind so that when I'm speaking I can just pull on it, or I can have a good educated guess at what the word might be? That's what you want to get to, really. So you're not going to be surprised, are you? Mauvaise habitude, a bad habit. That's the adjective to describe habit. Prendre de bonnes habitudes, to develop good habits. Yeah, so you can see those connections, I hope. Now I've put a heading here, the meaning here, get used to, practice. Okay, so we're going to get the habit thing there. So we've got avoir l'habitude again here with practice. Avec l'habitude with practice. So, you can get good at this. Avec l'habitude. Avoir l'habitude de quelque chose, de quelqu'un, to be used to something or somebody. For example, avoir l'habitude des enfants, to be used to children. Avoir l'habitude de faire quelque chose, to be used to doing something. Habituer, to familiarize someone with something or to train them. And then the reflexive of that, s'habituer, to get used to something. And then we can take it a little bit further if you want. Les habitués, another noun, the regulars. So the regulars down the pub, for example, les habitués, because they've got l'habitude d'y aller. Une routine habituelle, a regular routine. And then you could say, now, the reason why I talked about the you here is because we've got a related family. It's not exactly the same family, is it? So we haven't got the you in there, because if you look at the verb here, habituer, s'habituer. But it is a related family, and this is not to confuse you, but habiter, habiter, to live. And I suppose you could sort of like make the connection. Well, if I live somewhere, I've got the habit of living there, haven't I? So, you know, that's a regular thing. That's pretty, I mean, the whole idea of une habitude is a fairly rock solid kind of meaning, isn't it? Sense to it. And so that could be. And then we know that related to habiter, we can then branch off and do the whole thing all over again if we want, related to the verb habiter, un habitant, an inhabitant, une habitante. And then we could even go a little stretch a little, réhabilitation, pardon. You know, and start to sort of like make the connection. Well, how come that's related to that word then? And then, of course, the other thing that we can do is we can sort of like see the connections between these words and the English equivalent. So then we can see the crossover of the two languages, which, you know, is another really useful way to remember words in French. And, you know, I find actually it's quite interesting, isn't it? To see how they evolved. So another way of trying to get this concrete in your mind is not just to have a look at list of words and see those connections, which is interesting as it is probably to have a look at some sentences that make it clear what the meaning is and how you can use it. So, une habitude, so prendre une pause café le matin est devenu une habitude pour moi. There we go, and see what the English underneath. Je me brosse habituellement les dents après chaque repas. Il est en retard pour le travail comme d'habitude. Elle ferme toujours la porte à clé par habitude. I'm just going to go back over those and just do the translation as well in case you want to listen to this as a podcast, which is something that is coming soon with the French room. So let's just have a look at that again. So prendre une pause café le matin est devenu une habitude pour moi. So having a coffee break in the morning has become a habit for me. Nice and easy. Faire quelque chose habituellement, to do something habitually. Sentence here, je me brosse habituellement les dents après chaque repas. I habitually brush my teeth after every meal. I don't do that, but I do remember that I worked with someone in France who did do that, actually. Comme d'habitude, as usual, adjective. Il est en retard pour le travail, comme d'habitude. So he's late for work, as usual. Par habitude, out of habit. Elle ferme toujours la porte à clé par habitude. She always locks the door out of habit. Prendre l'habitude de faire quelque chose, to get into the habit of doing something. J'ai pris l'habitude de faire de l'exercice tous les matins. I've got into the habit of exercising every morning. Avoir l'habitude de faire, to be in the habit of doing something. Elle a l'habitude de lire avant de dormir. So she's in the habit of reading before sleeping. Perdre une habitude, to get out of a habit. Après son voyage, elle a perdu l'habitude de fumer. After her trip, she got out of the habit of smoking. Une mauvaise habitude, a bad habit. Mordre ses ongles est une mauvaise habitude. Biting one's nails is a bad habit. Prendre de bonnes habitudes, to develop good habits. Il essaie de prendre de bonnes habitudes alimentaires. He's trying to get into good eating habits. Avec l'habitude, je jouerai mieux du piano avec l'habitude. I'll be able to play the piano better with a bit of practice. So, avec l'habitude. Avoir l'habitude de quelque chose, quelqu'un, to be used to something or someone. Elle a l'habitude du bruit, ayant grandi en ville. She's used to noise, having grown up in the town, in the city. avoir l'habitude des enfants, to be used to children. Elle a l'habitude des enfants étant professeur d'école. She's used to children being a school teacher. Do you know, there's lots of examples here, and you might say, oh, gosh, that's too many. But actually, this repetition is the key, isn't it, to really getting that nice and concrete in your mind and those connections. Give your brain a chance to hear something enough times, and it will be able to store it and make those connections. Don't expect just sort of like a quick skim, so seeing something once or twice will mean that it's actually banked. You've got to do this work to bank it. Il a l'habitude de faire du vélo tous les week-ends. He's used to cycling every weekend. So used to there. To habituer, to familiarize someone with something or to train. Il faut habituer le chien au bruit des feux d'artifice. We need to get the dog trained or used to the noise of fireworks. To familiarize the dog with the sound of fireworks. S'habituer, this is the reflexive, to get used to something. Il faut du temps pour s'habituer à un nouvel environnement. It takes time to get used to a new environment. You could say, il faut du temps pour s'habituer aux familles de mots. It takes some time to get used to this sort of like making families of words. But once you get into into your step, once you get into the habit of doing it, you'll find actually, oh, okay, it's really quite easy to start to make those connections. And that's great, isn't it? Because when you grab one new word, maybe you've got 10, maybe you've got 20, maybe you've got a whole load of different phrases that suddenly open up a massive door for you in the French language. So it's worth spending a little bit of time thinking about this, I think. Les habitués, the regulars. Les habitués du café se retrouvent tous les matins pour discuter. So the regulars at the cafe meet every morning to chat. Une routine habituelle, a regular routine. Elle suit une routine habituelle qui inclut une séance d'entraînement quotidienne. So she follows a regular routine that includes a daily workout. And then if we have a look at some of our, this is now our related family. So maybe they're just, if you were trying to sort of like think about this, maybe you'd say that they're the people who live next door. Maybe that's a related family, or maybe you want to say that they're cousins, or maybe they were a generation before or generation after. It doesn't really matter how you construct this world about how you're categorizing them. But you want to say, okay, they're related, but they're not quite the same. They're not quite the same because habitué is different from habitué, which means to be used to something, is different from habiter, which is to live. But you could kind of make the connection that to live somewhere is to be in the habit of something. So let's have a look. Habiter, to live, which is one of the first verbs you learn, isn't it, in French? J'habite dans cette maison depuis 10 ans. So I've been living in this house for 10 years. Un habitant, les habitants de ce village sont très accueillants. So the inhabitants of this village are very welcoming. And then it's sort of like a slight step away from that, but maybe you can make the connection. It's réhabilitation, sorry. Le centre offre des programmes de réhabilitation pour les patients en convalescence. So the center offers rehabilitation programs for patients in convalescence. So I hope I've given you some things to think about and to try. Maybe have a go at, you could write this one out if you wanted to, or find another one, and see whether that helps you to grab onto and keep a larger spread of vocabulary in one big bite. Thanks very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope to see you again soon. Merci. Très bonne journée. Au revoir. Au revoir.